Hey, do you realize that most Christian writers do not miss their calling because they are lazy or disobedient? They miss it because somewhere along the way, they started believing a lie. All right, you're a writer, all right, and you have felt the call of God to write. You've been prompted deep in your spirit, but then you start somewhere, somehow, you got this idea that you're supposed to write your whole life story. And that's where most writers get stuck because God has placed it on your heart, and you think, oh, you got to tell everything about your past. And it's not really about that. It's about a specific message that's for somebody else's breakthrough. So before this video ends today, I'm going to share with you a simple framework that you can use to get clarity and finally move forward in your God-given calling to write your book. So if you've been sitting there wondering, where do I start and what am I supposed to write? You're in the right place. So, hey there, I'm Shonda Whitworth, and I'm a Christian nonfiction writing coach. I help authors conquer overwhelm, finish their manuscripts, release their books that God's called them to write. You know, the New York Times says that 81% of the people say they want to write a book. Only 6% ever finish a manuscript, and only actually 1% publish a book. And my goal here is to help you rise to the 1% while staying true to your calling that God's given you. So now that you know who I am and why I do what I do, let's get real about what actually keeps most Christian writers stuck. It's not the fear of failure, that a little alliteration there, a fear of failure or lack of talent. It's confusion about what you're called to write and where do you start. So let's break it down a little bit, all right? Let's say that you've shared some inspiration with others and they are like, "Oh, that's great. You should write a book." And so you start getting this confirmation that you should write a book because people are like, "That's great. You should write a book." So you share something with somebody else and they say, "Oh, that's great. You should write a book." And so then you start to think, "Yeah, I should write my book. I can tell my story." But we don't think we just tell part of the story. We think we got to tell our whole life story. And that's the snare that the enemy lays in our path. That we think that the call from God to write a book means we've got to chronicle out our entire life. But writing our whole life story is one of the fastest ways that we will get overwhelmed and completely stall out and go nowhere. So, what God has actually asked you to do is to release a message, a specific message, not your autobiography and not a memoir, but a message. So, let's unpack that for just a minute. What is an autobiography? An autobiography is a biography you write yourself, for one. And a biography is typically about a person's whole life from the beginning to the end. All right. That's an autobiography. You write your whole life story from the beginning to the end. A biography is somebody writes your whole life story, somebody else writes it. All right. A memoir is covered on a focused season. All right. And a lot of beginning writers have this desire to write a memoir. And a memoir is one of the most difficult forms of writing, especially for a beginner, unless you know how to write novels. If you're a novelist, then it will transition easy for you because a memoir is really written like a novel, but it's nonfiction. And it has themes and plots and twists and all this stuff in it. All right. A Christian living book, that is a message that teaches a biblical truth through your own personal experience. All right. And that is basically what it may be on the category of the of non-Christian books, of self-help books. All right. Like moving in through these phases of life, moving through this, like parenting books, that falls into Christian living if it's a Christian book. But you're sharing a message that has a biblical truth. You're sharing your story and it has a biblical truth. That's Christian living. All right. You're sharing that biblical truth through your personal experiences and what God's taught you through your testimony. So you're basically sharing your testimony. All right. So you're not writing about yourself, though you're telling your story. You're showing what God revealed to you and how you started applying the biblical principles and how you came out of that season of life a better person because God guided you. And now that God's guided you, you could turn around and guide others. People are interested in your story and what you've learned because you understand what they are going through. You get it, you relate to them, you connect to them, and they're going to connect to you. So your story matters. It does. It really does. Your story matters. And when God calls you to write, He wants your message to be very clear and concise, not tucked into your whole story timeline. Think about this. When we go out and we meet friends, for coffee or tea or dinner or lunch or whatever, and we start sharing parts of our life with them, we don't start with, I was born in a small town in the 60s. No, we lost them. They'll be like, oh, look, excuse me, let me go. And they go get up and go to the bathroom. They get up and go refill their drink, or they get up and go do something because we lost them. It's the same way with a book. We don't want to start with, I was born in a small town in West Texas in the 60s moment. We want to start with the moment that we're excited about when God showed up and how He changed our lives. So we want to start with that moment, or we want to start with the moment that changed our lives forever, that memorable moment that we will never forget, that moment that is forever sealed in our memory, and how God got us out of that. All right. So listen, I have coached writers who have stayed stuck for years because they're trying to get their story just right. But when they understood this core principle that I'm sharing in this video right here, that they are to share one message in a book, one message, one takeaway. And that's where people get confused. One takeaway in a book. Yes, one message. All right. One truth that God has already seen them through. All right, that they finished their book in months, just like in my book, Appeal to the Courtroom of Heaven. In that book, that is a prayer book based on what I learned about praying in the courts of heaven, but how I saw that earthly courts through my son's conviction, how earthly courts are modeled after the heavenly courts. And so I tell my story. So I don't know of another Pray in the Courtroom of Heaven books that are out there that is based on a prison family journey. I think mine is unique to that. And so we share parts of our life. Like I did not share everything in the book about my whole life. I shared what the Lord taught me about praying in the courts of heaven through what I learned through going through the judicial system with my son. And so it's not about cutting out parts of your life. It's about focusing on the parts that will that will show someone else the breakthrough that they're seeking. Because somebody out there is praying for the answer that your message has. All right, so I promised you some framework. So here's some framework for you. And I want you to ask yourself these questions so you can find out and get clarity about what your message is and what you want to write about. So ask yourself and answer this question. Write this down. What do people ask you about the most? So what do people ask you about? Write that question down, and then you go back and answer this later and reflect on that. Another question to ask yourself and for you to write down: what trials or adversities have you overcome with God's help? What has He seen you through? So, what are the trials and adversities that God has seen you through? All right. Also, what can you teach very easily without overthinking and researching it? What just comes off the top of your head? What just comes naturally for you? So write those three questions down. Start answering those three questions. Then, after you've got your list, those list of those three things, look at which one stands out the most. And don't start with the hardest story, because oftentimes the hardest story, we're still healing in that area. All right. God's still working on us. But start with the one that just flows, the one that you can just talk about all day long, one that you don't mind talking about on social media. Because I share in my coaching groups, when do you start promoting your book on social media? You start promoting your book on social media the moment you decide to write a book, right? So that's when you start sharing on social media. So you start sharing on social media what you're starting to write about. Start sharing about the content. You don't have to say, I'm writing a book, but you just start putting out content around your topic. I want to share this scripture with you from Proverbs 16:9. It reads, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his step." So God wants to direct our steps. But if we're not taking steps, then clarity is not going to come. So by taking these steps and answering these questions, and then highlighting or circling the ones on the list that just flow from you, that is the place that you start working on. Now, it doesn't mean that God won't shift you. You start working on one, and He may still shift you. That's happened to me. All right. I started writing on a book, and I was redirected. All right. So that's all right. So that's not time wasted. That's and God will still use that and come back to that later. But move where He shows you to move. All right. We go where He says to go. We shift when He says to shift. So we are spirit led. We're to be led by the Spirit. We're to follow Him, but we follow Him once we start taking steps. He doesn't lead us when we just do nothing. We got to start taking those steps. So now you got your topic picked from your list, just one topic on something that you already know, something that you don't have to think about a whole lot, and start writing on that. Start taking that step to write. You don't have to have your book mapped out yet. You don't have to have it clearly outlined yet, because right now you just want to start writing down, what do you know about that topic? And writing down that list of what you know about your topic may turn into your outline. All right. That's how you just start moving in that direction. Obedience is what creates clarity, taking one small step at a time, and God's going to meet you in that motion. And if you want someone to help guide you into getting more clarity, be sure to click the link in the description and look for the ways that we can work together. I would love to help you get more clarity if you want that. But for now, to keep moving ahead, once you've gotten some of those list of topics that you can write about, start with 15 minutes today. Start writing 15 minutes on what you know, and make your personal writing inventory and choose that one topic and start writing on that. You'll be amazed at how much peace you're going to start experiencing, because you've moved from overwhelm to doing. You've moved from stuck to unstuck. You're actually taking action, and you're no longer missing it. You're no longer missing your calling because you're overthinking things, thinking that you got to write about your whole life. Now you know you're only writing about a snippet of it, and you can get stuff done. So take that first small step toward clarity. That's how you're going to rise to the 1%. If this message has spoke to you, please leave a comment down below. I would love to hear that. Like and share this video with somebody else who's saying, God's calling me to write a book, And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next message that comes out to keep you in line with your God-given calling to reach the 1%. God bless.